Sacajawea was born in 1787 AD, and died in 1875 AD. She was also known as Yaa-Nun and was from the Shoshone tribe. Some references say she died in 1812 or 1884, but research proves that she died in 1875 when she was 88 years old. She was the daughter of a medicine man. Sacajawea was referred to as the Bird Woman. When she was 14, while she and her brother Kamiyawait were racing, a Hidatsa war party from a village on the Missouri River, what is now called North Dakota, attacked the camp of her people. Her father, the Shoshone chief, was killed in this battle. Sacajawea and an older black slave girl tried to escape across the river near their camp, but were captured. Sacagawea's brother thought she was dead. The war party then set out for home with their prisoners, but the older black slave girl of the Washita tribe escaped one night, leaving the little girl Sacajawea a lonely captive. She was carried to the Hidatsa village in North Dakota, and was sold to Toussaint Charbonneau, the fur trader and French-Canadian trapper. He took Sacajawea as a captive and placed her in the care of his wife, who was also a captive from the Shoshone Native Americans. In 1804 AD, when Sacajawea was 18 years old, Charbonneau took her for his second wife. However, Toussaint Charbonneau never respected Sacajawea enough to marry her. He knew that it was against the American and French law to marry a Native American, African slave, or Aborigine. According to the Act of 1705 AD, it states, in part, "Whatsoever white man or woman being free shall intermarry with a Negro shall be committed to prison for 6 months without bail, and pay £10 to the use of the parish. Ministers marrying such persons shall pay 10,000 pounds of tobacco." The crew camped for the winter at Fort Mondon in North Dakota, which is where Charbonneau was also spending the winter with the young beautiful Shoshone girl Sacajawea. When winter broke, Charbonneau was hired to guide Lewis and Clark due to his knowledge of the country where he trapped. Charbonneau was the French interpreter for Lewis and Clark. On February 11, 1805 AD, Meriwether Lewis Wright, about 5 o'clock this evening one of the wives of Charbonneau was delivered of a fine boy. It is worthy of remark that this was the first child this woman had born, and as common in such cases her labor was tedious and the pain violent. Sacajawea gave birth to a baby boy, whom she called Pomp, the Shoshone word for firstborn. His name was Jean Baptiste and was often called Toussaint. Charbonneau was specifically instructed to bring Sacajawea with her baby boy, Jean-Baptiste, on the expedition for several reasons. First of all, the presence of a woman and baby would establish the peaceful nature of the party. Secondly, a native translator and negotiator with knowledge of the languages on the West Coast tribes, the tribes of the country and their customs, was essential. Ben York performed the same service for the East Coast tribes. Sacajawea served as a translator for the Plains Native American tribes, interpreting what was said to her. Her knowledge of the terrain and mountain passes saved weeks of travel time. Her ability to speak and negotiate with native tribes allowed the expedition to keep fresh horses and food all along the way. When food was scarce, Sacajawea gathered and prepared roots, nuts, berries and other edible plants in order to provide tasty nourishment. Upon the end of the expedition, Toussaint Charbonneau was paid and dismissed by Lewis and Clark for his services. On August 17, 1806 AD, Sacajawea received some blue beads by Clark. Charbonneau returned to his homeland and left Sacajawea and their son Jean-Baptiste behind. Later in life, Jean-Baptiste became a Western traveler and trader in Haiti. Clark was so taken with Sacajawea and so concerned about her welfare at the hands of the abusive and wife-beating Charbonneau, he proposed taking the infant boy to be raised in safety. For her efforts in making the expedition successful, Lewis and Clark named a river Sacajawea in her honor. On August 20, 1806 AD, William Clark wrote a letter to Charbonneau stating, "You have been a long time with me and have conducted yourself in such a manner as to gain my friendship. Your woman who accompanied you that long, dangerous and fatiguing route to the Pacific Ocean and back, deserved a greater reward for her attention and services on that route than we had in our power to give her at the Mandans. As to your little son, my boy Pomp, you well know my fondness for him and my anxiety to take and raise him as my own child. I once more tell you, if you will bring your son Baptiste to me, I will educate him and treat him as my own child. I do not forget the promise which I made to you and shall now repeat them, that you may be certain, Charbonneau, if you wish to live with the white people, and will come to me, I will give you a piece of land and furnish you with horses, cows and hogs. Wishing you and your family great success, and with anxious expectations of seeing my little dancing boy Baptiste, I shall remain your friend." Sacajawea did take her son to William Clark in Street Louis, where he was raised as Clark's own. According to Empress Verdia Ctri Washita Turner Gostin L. Bay, York was hitching a ride on the slide of the Washita. He was the half-brother to the Washo Washo woman, Anayamari, the daughter of Old York, and Aimari Iya, the old empress. By half-brother and sister we mean that they had the same father and not the same mother. If you have the same father, then you are considered half-brother or sister. However, if you have the same mother, you are considered full-blooded brother and sister because the mother's genes would take over. By that I mean the mother has XX chromosomes and the father has XY chromosomes. When the sperm and the egg comes together, then the three X's would take over the Y. So the mother's genes would dominate, not the father's. A woman's genes are stronger than a man's genes. This is supported by the mitochondrial DNA, which is only physically passed on by females, not by males. This means that the man had to come from the female. Sacajawea and Charbonneau also had a daughter in 1812, named Elizabeth Carbonneau, also called Lizette. Sacajawea, also known as Yaa-Nun, and Toussaint Charbonneau were taking their baby, Sichon Charbonneau, to the old empress, so that she may be held by her and become blessed. Anaya Mari was the legal Washita wife, and the illegal French wife of Joseph de Maison Rouge. She was the mother of Henty Turner. Sacajawea and Ben York became very useful in the Lewis and Clark expedition, being that they spoke different languages, and they became the translators. Upon the return home from the expedition, York returned with William Clark to the estate in Virginia, where Clark is said to have married Julia Hancock. Ben York continued to serve as a translator, not a slave as you are taught to believe. William Clark promised York his freedom after the expedition, but instead, William Clark gave him a wagon and 6 horses as a business which he ran as a freighter between Richmond, Virginia and Nashville, Tennessee. In St. Louis, where the expedition trained for the trip, York began to pick up French and more Native American languages. By the time the task force set out, he was able to assist Sacajawea. For the next 2.5 years, the two dark explorers, Sacajawea and Ben York, were able to convince one Native American nation after another that the 43 men and 1 woman came in peace. Ben York also became one of the party's best hunters, fishermen, and scouts. By the last year of the journey, he was given the assignment of trading with the Native Americans for the expedition's food. The crew crossed the Rocky Mountains in the summer of 1805 AD. They landed at the cape called Disappointment, August 15, 1805 AD. They had passed the Snake River, named for the cleverness of the Shoshone, also called Yaa-Nun by the French, to its junction with Columbia and as far as the Pacific Ocean, where Sacajawea met her brother Camille again. They were happy to see each other. She learned that her mother and her sister were dead. Her brother Camille didn't understand why the white men came to the land, whereupon Sacajawea told him that they needed horses to cross the mountains. Camille gave the captains 12 horses. The next morning Captain Clark told Sacajawea that they needed her, and wanted her to help them. Camille, her brother, said, "My heart is heavy, but I know you must go. Will you come back?" Whereupon Sacajawea was speechless. She rode off proudly on a fine Shoshone horse. The crew wintered at Clatsop, south of Columbia. This expedition returned to St. Louis, September 23, 1805 AD. Sacajawea was mistaken for an Osage, due to her noiselessness. They called her a Snake Indian. An Osage were Native American people formerly inhabiting western Missouri and later southeast Kansas, with a present-day population in north-central Oklahoma. Substantial oil reserves were discovered on Osage lands in the early 20th century. Sacajawea was beautiful and evaded all of their attempts and desires. She and her family were with them from the beginning with a baby. They learned that Sacajawea was a princess when they reached the Washita. Their real motives were to return home. Upon the expedition's return, Captain Lewis and Lieutenant Clark were honored with 1,600 acres of the Washita land each. All others in the party were given 320 acres of the land each, except Ben York. He was betrayed by William Clark, and wasn't given a thing. He was called a slave that belonged to Lewis. However, Ben York was not a slave according to the Act of 1682 AD, and the clause of 1800 AD, because he didn't fall under the Jim Crow laws as a Moor. Because of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1787, Article 21 made with the Emperor of Morocco, Sidi Muhammad ibn Abdullah, also known as Muhammad III, which states that the Moors would be treated as equal as the citizens of the United States. This treaty is strengthened by Article 3 Section 2 and Article 6 second paragraph of the Constitution. Article 3 Section 2 reads, "The judicial power shall extend to all cases, in law and equity, arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made or which shall be made under their authority, to all case affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and between a state, or the citizens thereof, and foreign foreign states, citizens or subjects. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. The trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crimes shall have been committed. But when not committed within any state, the trial shall be at such place or places as the Congress may by law have directed. And Article 6 second paragraphs reads, This Constitution, and the laws of the United States which shall be marked in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Many Nubians do not know their rights. There are the constitutional rights, their national rights as Moors or their indigenous rights, having been as Nubuns, here long before the Europeans came to America. There are laws in the Constitution that protects these rights that you are not taught. Like the Moroccan Treaty of Peace and Friendship, you are not taught about that. There are many laws that you are not entitled to only because you do not know them to exercise them. For example, you are not taught that the only judge that has the right to preside over any court of the United States is a judge according to the 3rd Article Section 1 of the United States Constitution. The 3rd Article of the Constitution states, Section 1, the judicial power of the United States, shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall, at stated times, receive for their services, a compensation, which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. So any judge's salary that has been diminished during his term in office, meaning he has paid taxes, insurance, or benefits, or any type of deduction, is not a judge. Because according to the Constitution, their compensation or slavery shall not be diminished. Thus, no other judge can preside over the court according to the 3rd Article of the Constitution, because they are not judges, and therefore they are not qualified to preside in any courtroom of the United States. If you, as a Yamasee tribe of Native American, Seminole, Creek, Washita Mound Builders, the United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors are not tried by a judge according to the 3rd Articles of the Constitution, then a writ of certiorari is in order to set the record straight. This writ of certiorari is a direct order from a superior court to a lower court, or to a public officer or public board, to send the record of the proceedings to the superior court for review. The higher court studies the record while the case is still pending and decides whether or not the inferior court is acting in accordance with the law. The superior court does not judge the proceedings according to the account, they only review the legal aspects of the case, such as whether the lower court has jurisdiction to try the case. The term writ of certiorari comes from the Latin certiorari, which is the infinite of the word certiorare, literally meaning to make more certain, from certior, comparative to certus, meaning sure, certain. The word writ comes from the Old English word writ, which means that which is written, the past participle of write, and which means to engrave, write. So if any judge refuses to step down to let a real judge preside over your case, then to call a writ, which is also defined as, to reduce in rank, value, or price, is legal and binding. The Moors are to be treated equal to the citizens of the United States according to the Treaty of Peace and Friendship No. 244-1 on June 28, 1786 AD, between Morocco and the United States, and according to Article 6 of their Constitution, a treaty is the supreme law of the land, and only a judge according to the 3rd Article of the Constitution can preside over any Moor's case or any case for that matter. Not to mention, that if you are a Moor or a descendant of a Moor, then you are protected under a treaty, and that will place you in international law, not in national, state or commercial law. Now, back to the point, Ben York was not a slave, nor was his father, who was a Moor. Thus his descendants are Moors and are protected under the Treaty of Peace and Friendship between Morocco and the United States. Ben York and Sacajawea gave birth to a son named Washiki, born in 1824 AD, and died 1900 AD. The first conflict started when a French named Toussaint Charbonneau raped Sacajawea, and produced a son named Jean-Baptiste, born in 1805 AD. When the expedition ended, Ben York and Sacajawea ran away together north to Boston, Massachusetts, living in Roxbury, Massachusetts amongst the Massachusetts. And Ben York lived and mixed amongst the Pequot, who moved down into Rhode Island and on into Connecticut and the Wampanoag tribes of Native Americans in that area. Eventually, Ben York needed money to reunite his family. So he sold the wagon and horses and went in search of his family, wives and children. This is what all slaves did when they became free. When William Clark returned, Ben York was gone. Ben York left the rumor that he died, when in actuality he didn't. He went to Roxbury, Massachusetts where the Native Americans were, and then to Virginia, in search of their son Washakie, with Sacajawea. Sacajawea and Washakie finally met up in Wyoming. Ben York continued migrating west. He and Sacajawea went back to the Shoshone tribes. He lived for a while in Pennsylvania, leaving family as Williams, Louisiana as Creole, Washingtons and the Millers, who moved from the Washingtons to South Carolina amongst the Geechee as Millers, Boston, New Bedford, as Yorks, and finally he returned to Virginia, where he later died, in Richmond, Virginia in the fall of 1893 AD, at the age of 114. Washakie reunited with his mother, Sacajawea, in Wyoming, who died 5 years after Ben York. Washakie was accepted by the Shoshone tribe and eventually became a chief. Washakie also became a great Native American personality of the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. For approximately 60 years, he was the recognized chief of the Shoshone tribe. Lewis became governor of the Louisiana Stolen Territory, and died October 11, 1809 AD, near Nashville, Tennessee. Clark later became the governor of the Mississippi Territory from 1813 AD to 1820 AD, and died September 1, 1838 AD. The clause of 1800 stemmed from a clause within the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson took out. It strongly condemned slavery. It stated, "Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he is prostituted as negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this execrable commerce. And that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished die, he is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us, and purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them, by murdering the people on whom he also obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of our people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another." This clause was taken out by Thomas Jefferson, in complaisance to South Carolina and Georgia, who had never attempted to restrain the importation of slaves, and who on the contrary, still wished to continue it, so he says. The truth of the matter is, Thomas Paine wrote this Declaration of Independence, and when Thomas Jefferson authored it, he took out this clause. However, 7 years later in the year 1784 AD, Virginia, which was considered America before the actual Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776 AD, under the Article of Confederations, ceded, or gave up the vast territory northwest of Ohio. Thomas Jefferson, a delegate of Virginia, drafted an ordinance to govern this territory or future territories to be ceded by individual states to the United States, extending from the 31st to the 47th degree of north latitude, covering all of the original 13 states. These fundamental conditions between the 13 original states are, after the year 1800 of the Christian era, there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in any of the said states. And that these fundamental conditions were unalterable except by the joint consent of the United States in Congress assembled and the particular state within which such alterations proposed to be made. So Ben York was born in Virginia before the whole America formed the Union, while America as a whole was called Virginia. During this time, John Hanson, a black Moor who was the first president of the Union. That is to say, before George Washington, there was a black president. Ben York was not lawfully a slave according to the Act of 1682 AD, and later the Ordinance of 1784 AD, known as Fundamental Conditions. He therefore was entitled to the same amount of land as the other persons involved in the so-called purchase of Louisiana. The southern states joined the United States or the Union as slave states, but only until the year 1800 AD, so America was buying time with its own Declaration of Independence. In 1784 AD, this ordinance gave them 16 years to get rid of slavery. This lawfully means that after 1800 AD, all slaves should have been freed. However, as history tells, this did not happen. In the year 1807 AD, Congress went against their own law and passed the 1808 clause under Article 1 Section 9, which reads, "The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit, shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person." From the above law, you can clearly see that the perpetrators of this government are not concerned with abolishing slavery, even though their forefathers saw it as an inherited evil. It was all about money to them. The United States was getting rich off of slavery, so they allowed it to continue. This law went unchanged for 65 years.